And we are live with our 63rd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, can you believe we've done 63 of these? Or this will be
I cannot. Yeah, this is the 63rd episode. It feels crazy to me. I look through the list and I'm like, holy crap, how did this happen, right? But welcome once again. We've got a great guest tonight. I know we were off last week. We promised something, but again, the super professional podcast that we are, life happened, but we came back. That's the important thing. The one big announcement that we've got this week is that Seth and Ken's excellent adventure and secure code review will be at AppSec USA. We did get accepted, so if you're going to be out there, please consider us for training. If you want to learn more about secure coding techniques, how we go about it, what we do, it's the same course that we taught at AppSec Day with our guest today at Julian, but it's been a really fun course for Ken and I to do and kind of share our knowledge around. So look for us there. Otherwise, I think we're going to jump right into talking with Julian today because the AppSec Minute and other things that we've got are relevant to the discussion with him. So, Julian, you want to say hello?
You want me to introduce him?
Yeah. Sure, go for it.
So, Julian is a principal security engineer at Seek. We are going to get into what he does and some of the lessons he's learned and the things he can share with us. But Julian has worked on the consulting side as well as like having done IT and software engineering, which I thought was a really cool. We'll get into it, but I thought it was really cool that he started in sort of those like fundamental roles before getting into AppSec and consulting and all that. So, but he's an organizer of AppSec Day Melbourne in Australia. And by the way, I learned last year that it was Melbourne because I didn't know. I thought it was Melbourne. That's the way I said it before.
Melbourne is normally how we get it, but it's fine. It doesn't really offend us too much. We're not easily offended.
Awesome. Perfect. Because I tried really hard, but I forgot a few times. So I'm glad you guys aren't easily offended.
I'm offended for you, Ken.
You're offended?
Yeah.
On Julian's behalf.
On Julian's behalf. There you go.
Perfect. So, and also he's one of the code chapter leads of OWASP Melbourne as well. So, Julian, thank you for joining us. You provided one of the two things that we're going to talk about tonight, which I figure we can jump right into because we are going to talk about your background, what you do, all that. But before we get into that, you had shared this LoDash vulnerability that was released. And what I thought was interesting about it is that we've been going through with the AppSec Minute once a week, one of the top 10 for Portswigger we go through a week. And I don't know if it was like episode, I don't know, 57, 58, maybe something like that. We talked about prototype pollution, where it's basically like meta programming using JavaScript. And so that's essentially what this LoDash vulnerability is that you gave. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
It was just interesting because I was going to say it was just posted like 8 hours ago. I don't think there's a patch for it yet. And I think though one of the devs at Seek where I work posted it in our channel. So it was interesting that they're getting that kind of information as well, pretty early.
Oh, wow. So the developers brought it to your attention.
Yes. Which I can talk about a little bit because, it's pretty awesome that we get that kind of information from them directly.
Yeah, no, definitely. Clearly you've established a pretty good relationship with your developers, but this is LoDash is used fairly widely.
Just a little bit. So there's 94,000 dependents on the LoDash library. If you look at the NPM.
94,000.
And then this week alone, there was about 21 million downloads. So it's a tiny bit in use in the JavaScript world.
Just a little bit, yeah. And it's pretty. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward. So there was a link. I don't know if I think that it's what you said. I don't know if it's patched, but there are two patches that this developer, and sorry, let me actually, did we put it in the live chat, Seth?
Yeah. I haven't put it in the live chat yet. I'll drop it in right now.
Sweet. Cool.
I'm putting in the link directly to the sneak, whatever, however you say it, vulnerability, because it's pretty, it's pretty awesome. Easy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think that was a previous similar one in LoDash. So it might not be the most recent one. So I think that was just a previous one, just to get an idea of what the impact could be and things like that. So I'm not sure if they've released yeah, I could be wrong actually. Yeah, so that one was published in February. So this was another one that's been disclosed.
Oh, okay. So the one that I dropped in there is the actual one from February.
But it's basically the same vulnerability as far as I can tell from the GitHub issues. So it's a little bit confusing. A little bit too, maybe the announcement was a bit too premature.
Too premature.
But it seems like remote code execution with this kind of pollution vulnerability is pretty unlikely unless you're using things like eval, which a lot of people potentially would. And the most common type is actually denial of service, which depending on your risk appetites, could be worse or not. Depends.
Yeah, definitely. Like what's your risk profile? Yeah, and I mean it's a pretty like straightforward. When I'm looking at the patches, I'm kind of seeing that it's pretty straightforward. A pretty straightforward fix. Basically, it's like we just check if the object type is a constructor, and if it's a function, like if the type of it equals function, then return. So it's like basically, if this is unsafe, which that's unsafe. You're defining code at runtime, right? So remote code execution, it's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I feel like another reason to move into something like TypeScript or something like that that's type safe, because I feel I'm not sure. Don't quote me on this because I haven't used TypeScript a lot, but this seems very specific to JavaScript, given that kind of fix very heavily goes into like making sure it's a function and that kind of thing rather than anything else.
Yeah, I'd seen.
The fix.
Were you the one that sent me that? Sorry, I think Seth, were you the one that sent me the thing where like it was the talk of like a JavaScript developer that had like several different operators, like equals, 3 equals, 4 equals, 5 equals. I feel like, was that you that sent that?
Yeah, it was a talk that I was in. I can't remember. It might have been just at a developer meetup, I think, down in Silicon Valley, down in San Francisco at one point. But it was, it's super interesting because it's all like the different ways that you can basically shoot yourself in the foot just by using the equal sign, because each one is a completely different function, right? The way it does comparisons, what it's doing. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, the fix is super interesting. It's not they're actually fixing the code. It's just basically checking whether or not it is a constructor, right? If the key is a constructor, then don't do this. Otherwise, it's okay. Which makes me think they're playing whack-a-mole. That's what it feels like. But
those types of fixes, like because you are essentially doing a blacklist, right? At that point, you're not whitelisting and saying like only this object type could be passed in or something like that.
I mean, it's pretty safe because constructor or proto. Yeah, I mean, we could get into the fine level detail, but I don't think we necessarily need to. It's just interesting that that's the way that they have to go about it. So like to Julian's point, that you're probably better off using a safer language if you are attempting to do some of this stuff than sticking with JavaScript. But to each his own, right?
I think the whole like proliferation of npm modules and the craziness that kind of goes about how many dependencies and how much code you actually inherit within your own applications is just crazy. Like we've did a hackathon later last year with a few of the devs at Seek on just like doing some analysis on the different libraries. Like this LoDash one is a perfect example. There was like a Facebook library as well where it had like thousands of dependencies, and like one of them had like one contributor, or like what kind of risk profile does it take for the transient dependencies? Like one developer needs to get hacked, and then all of a sudden you have 90,000 other libraries that have this like malicious code in it. It's pretty crazy, and that's kind of live in production in a lot of scenarios. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of world we live in at the moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to find this from Adam Baldwin where he talked about, I want to say it was, like I said, 962,000 published packages. And he said...
This was the talk at LocoMocoSec, right? Where he
correct.
the number of dependencies.
Yeah, he said, I don't remember I'm trying to remember the percentage. It was something like 97% of applications, Node applications are comprised of third-party dependencies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't find that slide, but yeah. Yeah, I can't find it. But yeah, that's basically what he put out there. I was like, that's insane. But it does sound right. Yeah, that's tough. So do you guys want to talk about the other thing, Boeing 737 MAX software?
Yeah, this one was interesting as well. Right? This just
you want to fill people in on it, Seth?
Well, basically it came out, if you want to post the links, right? But it came out just within the last couple of days that the developers of the software that goes into the Boeing 757 MAX, or I think a lot of the Boeing machines or the Boeing aircraft is actually contracted out to developers that are only getting paid something like $10 an hour or less, right? So these critical systems are being developed for less than we're paying people to work at McDonald's, right? That's realistically what it boils down to.
Yeah, it is interesting. I just had a read through it as well when you sent me the link before, and it seems like, and you have to take their word for it, I guess, but they claim that the critical kind of maneuverability systems and the critical kind of parts of the plane weren't designed by those particular contractors. But it's like kind of hard to really believe them when they also say, like, during this all-staff meeting with thousands of senior engineers in the room, or hundreds, there was a quote of like, we don't need any senior people anymore because our software is mature. So when you have like CEOs or whoever it was that state that kind of stuff in front of a massive audience of all these engineers, that's ringing some alarm bells.
Yeah, no, I mean, the other thing is that like there was one of the employees said that basically like through this outsourcing, the software continued to degrade. And I know that there was another flaw found, which is why they continue to be grounded. But I think that there were tests run by the Federal Aviation Administration that basically show like a whole sequence of maybe not like critical, but like flaws in the code that they've discovered. And you've got that in tandem with these employees from Boeing saying like, oh yeah, once we started outsourcing, software's continued to degrade, and it is like a house of cards, right? Like it has to be built, like every piece has to be built well, and if there's shoddy software, I mean, like that has a chain effect. So I think it's also harder to believe because of that, like that from my perspective,
Yeah, I mean, it all funnels up to the people that are managing the project as a whole, right? Like quality is not just like, we know this in software, we know this in other engineering fields, that quality is not just one piece, right? It's the unit as a whole. And like, if you can't make it happen with the simple that then the ability to control the whole machine or the whole product, that it's going to suffer. This whole thing harkens back to the Hertz debacle with Accenture. I don't know if we talked about that on the podcast as well.
I don't think we have. No, I don't.
So this was a couple months ago. Hertz actually sued Accenture for breach of contracts because they were contracted by Hertz to redevelop their whole online presence, their mobile apps, everything, all the way that consumers interact with Hertz to actually book cars. And Accenture failed completely, right? Cost overruns, and like Accenture is one of the big accounting firms that's supposed to be able to do this development, but they outsource things and they just couldn't put it together. Let me post the link really quick. But they were sued for like $32 billion for breach of contract because of what happened. But it's a similar type thing, right? The management lets things spin out of control and doesn't actually put it together in a good way, right? You're chasing to the bottom, kind of this, hey, we need developers, but we want the cheapest possible to developers that can develop just the bare minimum of what we need. And it doesn't always piece together like you expect it to. So I don't know in the case of Hertz if that's exactly what happened, but it feels very similar in as far as the code quality, and that code and application delivery is not just the application source code itself. It's the whole process. It's that whole software development lifecycle that we're always talking about. If you don't get that right, it doesn't matter. Like, what's going to come out the end is probably going to be subpar. Sorry,
it's
I'm going
interesting.
kind of a rant.
No, that's right. I was going to say, like, do you think it stems from the fact that a lot of industries are moving towards like highly software, like software is eating the world, that kind of expression that a lot of people have been touting recently? And you have these companies that have historically been not software companies, and now they're forced into this world of being a software company. And then management and the whole process around it, they don't really know how to deal with, and they don't understand the concepts of like what software is, or they don't understand the value of good engineers and what they can provide to a longer term success, like that kind of thing. It seems like Silicon Valley obviously started from a base level of only software, whereas you have, and then their founders and all that kind of stuff are very technical. So they just inherently get what a quality engineer can provide, and the difference between someone who's getting paid $9 an hour versus someone who's not, right? Because one of the quotes in the article was related to the fact that it was getting too expensive to hire local people to do the software delivery. So that kind of indicates that they don't have very good ways of measuring quality within their employers, and they don't understand the benefits of that quality over the long term. So I feel like that's probably the crux of it.
Yeah, and they also quoted in that article that they sent back that it was very common to multiple times send back the code because it had flaws and it wasn't working. It wasn't even just like, we'll say like insecure or like, poorly written. It was like it didn't work, and they had that happen multiple times, and they had to keep sending it. They said they had a building across from from the Seattle branch over there, and so they would just like, I guess, shoot it across to that building and say like, this is still messed up. And that kept happening. So what's the cost of that? What are the costs of those delays? And then sadly, you see also talking about quotes, one of the developers had gone on LinkedIn and said like they found interesting solutions to basically like unblock the costly delays of that Boeing would incur with. I don't remember what it was like testing or the software was messed up or whatever, but I'm like, all this seems very sketchy, but also costly as well. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's just $9 for that 1 hour, right? How many hours is that person taking up of everyone around them when that code's not properly written?
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem when we start assigning costs on a manpower basis. Right? Like, we're looking at developers per hour and what their cost is, but you've got everything else that goes into that you're not taking into account. Like I said, I mean, software development is a process. And to Julian's point, all companies nowadays have to be technology companies. If you're not, you're going to suffer. So in Hertz's case, they thought that they had a partner that was actually going to deliver on that. And I don't know if that was Hertz's or Accenture's fault. That's what they're arguing about in court. But they were basically trying to transition to be a better technology company. And that's what you see across the board. I mean, that's what Walmart has done, right? From being a strict brick and mortar at one point to actually having technology in their stores and their whole supply chain that made them the behemoth that they are. So the companies that exist nowadays have made that transition, like Julian is saying. And software is eating the world. It controls everything. So if we don't assign the proper values to those developers, it's probably not going to be what we want. It's interesting to watch.
The other point I'll say is that maybe it's not about the money saved on So like, okay, part of the article insinuates heavily that the $22 billion they received from various Indian air travel companies, like the 22 billion they received, and through specifically the Indian military, like they got that. Basically that's a kickback for like funding these Indian tech companies to like write their software. So that's kind of insinuated that basically that $22 billion worth of purchases was just kickback for that. So it's like, maybe it's not about how cheap. I mean, maybe it's partly about how cheap the labor is, but also like that potential relationship and that conflict there, which is another thing that kind of like, to throw on top of all this, one thing that also bothered me as I started to think about it was like, presumably you would hope that there are regulations in place where that software has to be secure, right? But like, what's the likelihood it is if you have outsourced foreign interests writing code for, and correct me if I'm wrong, Boeing is an American company, right? Like, you know, we have foreign companies writing software. I'm not like trying to imply anything, especially with our foreign guest on the podcast tonight. But you know, it just that makes me feel uncomfortable riding in a plane. You know, just because I don't know the ins and outs of it. You know, I don't know. I don't know if you guys feel the same way or if that seems worrisome. I mean, if you can make code that doesn't work, like you can certainly make insecure or backdoored code, you would think.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it seems more apparent that kind of thing with China, I guess, is the obvious one, given that I just read an article this morning that was posted in Slack around that they're basically forcing tourists to install text stealing malware when you enter the country and things like that. So it's kind of like, it's pretty crazy world that we live in at the moment regarding that kind of thing. You know, you hear the electronics, so like Apple go to very far lengths to kind of verify that their silicon is as designed, and they actually get what they're expecting back from the China suppliers and things like that. And no one really talks about this stuff very much, but it's kind of a real threat and it's a real thing. So it's interesting to kind of see how it's all panning out a little bit.
No, it's definitely a real threat and a real thing. I mean, I know a lot of companies mine included, there's certain countries where if you travel, like you have to bring a Chromebook and a burner phone and throw that away the second you leave that, or, you know, you're going to leave the country. And that's just the way it is. So, yeah, I don't know. The whole thing's weird. It makes me I distrust big corporations, period. Right. I mean, everybody should have some like healthy concern, but as Julian pointed out, it's not a software company, which makes the fact that software, you know, let's just face it, you know, hundreds of people died because of some software failures. It just, yeah, I think you make a good point, Julian, that it's not a software company, but they kind of have to be, or they have to be.
Yeah, it kind of brings up an interesting point around outsourcing in general, because we have a lot of that going on in Australia with other firms that aren't pure software companies, like especially in the financial industry and that kind of thing, where they really struggle to, especially from a security perspective. I know we can kind of segue back into security a little bit from this, but yeah, from a security perspective, it's really hard to develop that culture. And that, you know, if you're having to deal with a new dev from a different country every day and the turnover is pretty high and you can't really get that training in there, you can't really build those relationships. So that puts a lot of other kind of problems in place, not just from a security perspective, but yeah, just culturally, it's just really difficult.
Well, that's a good segue into what you do for a living. So, yeah, can you tell us? We'll just start with what you currently do. You know, I know we mentioned it before. You're a principal security engineer at Seek, but I think dev education, some of the things you've learned, some of the experiences and stories you have to share, that's what we're really interested to hear tonight. So,
Yeah, sure. I mean, like this morning, I guess I was actually writing what we call RFCs internally at Seek, and that was from a post by Riot Games in 2015, and they did a presentation at AWS reInvent as well at the time, where they explained this process of taking like a standard. So 4 years ago, if I created a standard at Seek and said, "Hey, developers, you need to follow this," I would have got crucified basically because it was an agile company and standards and policies are not a word you can be using lightly. These days it's not as bad, but the process that I went through to learn how to make it approachable by learning from some of these other companies as well has been really interesting to me because you kind of essentially it's like how do you scale security knowledge within the organization, especially in product teams. In a scalable way. So you have a small team. I know you've mentioned this a few times on your podcast around like, you have a small security team, but like so many developers, how do you give them enough one-on-one time, enough direction, enough guidance at the right time that you can actually do other work and improve other things as well as training and giving them the help they need. So I guess there's a lot in that question and a lot in that problem.
Yeah, there is.
And I don't claim to have solved all of it, but some of the methods we've been using have been pretty successful. And I mean, I can talk about a few of them, I guess, but the RFC process for us over the last 2 years has been really effective. So that's essentially taking what you'd think of as a standard. So let's say authentication as a standard. We want all devs to be following these kind of standard OAuth flows. We want devs to be like storing passwords like this, blah, blah, like all that kind of typical standard stuff. Writing it in a way that kind of presents it as a problem statement, kind of a must, should, could, similar to your RFC kind of internet standards. And then as a pull request, you push that out to the technology community and ask for their feedback, see what they think. Does it make sense? Is it achievable? Whatever's written in there. Are there any patterns that we can use and build internally to help them achieve these kind of standards? So having that process in there and it goes through this kind of lengthy process of getting adopted from a draft state really helps me personally like understand the technology stacks, the problems, and be able to empathize with the teams a lot more about what their challenges are, because you could just sit on your high horse writing all this kind of standards being like, yeah, you must input validate and do all this kind of stuff, but then you realize actually when it comes down to them actually doing that, it could be harder for some reasons you don't understand. So that kind of feedback process via a GitHub pull request in our case that's been really awesome to see because we have so much people looking through it, reviewing it, helping us improve. And it's not just security standards. This is for just all tech design. So as much as possible, we try and build things that are relevant for the whole engineering community, not just security team. One, because I think the longevity of those kind of projects tend to be a bit more self-fulfilling because people want to use it for engineering, like reliability standards, architecture standards and patterns and that kind of thing, rather than just here's a security thing we've created. So that's kind of the base level. It makes a bit more sense when you can see it.
So are these markdown files that that developers reference? And is there like, so do they read it? Is it part of like, for instance, internally we have a 90-day checklist for new developers. And so they have, part of that is reading the AppSec standards. Is that part of some compulsory sort of process, or is it just like I'm putting a new app together, I want to go and build authentication? Where do I go to this repo and do the markdown?
The searching / indexing of all of that knowledge, it's really hard just to be like, or for us anyway, it's hard to say, hey, a new dev comes along, here's 30 RFCs, go read them all. I think that would put anyone to sleep, in my opinion. And it's a bit hard. Like it's a lot of information there. Some of it's not really relevant to the team that they're going into. If they're like a mobile dev versus front end dev versus a back end dev, like that kind of thing. Like it depends what team they're using, what stack they're using. We have a pretty diverse stack as well. So then that's kind of the foundation, right? So then on top of RFCs, we have things like your tech induction, where we do reference things like that are important and things you should be doing and who the team is and all that kind of stuff. So every new developer goes through that 2-hour tech induction for security specifically. It's a 2-day long thing. But then on top of that, so if a dev's like, okay, I'm starting a new project or I'm starting a new feature or whatever it is that they're trying to do, how do you give them that kind of guidance when they need it and only the guidance that's relevant to them? So part of that is actually from a tool that Slack open source, where the idea came from for us, which is called Go SDL. And they've written a few blog posts about it, and Max and Callie have presented about it quite a few times in their team. And that kind of showed me that you can make it very accessible to do like a simple checklist, like you were mentioning, Ken. That's probably similar to your 90-day checklist where you're kind of going through, but more from a feature perspective or from a new development perspective. So they're trying to do something, and it says, hey, and not just for technical engineers, it's also for delivery managers or product managers. So they can actually see all the things that they need to consider within the scope of their product and what they should be thinking about or doing, not just from a security perspective, but all the different aspects of product delivery. And it just puts it in a consumable way. It's hard to kind of visualize it unless I show you, but it ends up being basically a Trello board or a list of tasks or a list of things to do with checklists in them that link off to the RFCs for more information.
Interesting.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. So, like you're talking about the RFCs, like the thing that interests me in that whole process is the kind of pattern development that you're doing on top of that, right? That feels to me like a lot of the just-in-time stuff that you were mentioning. That, right? Like if I build a pattern for authentication or like the storage of password secrets or whatever it is. That's very easy to show to someone and say, hey, look, you have to use bcrypt or PBKDF2, and this is the way that we normally do it. Is that how you've gone about this? Is just breaking it down into consumable pieces?
As much as sorry, keep going.
No, sorry. Yeah, you can go ahead and answer.
No, I was going to say, as much as we try and keep it, so the other ways that we try and keep it simple, like I really empathize with developers these days because they have so much to think about when they're building a product. Like the stack isn't just your application layer anymore, it's the whole thing. So they're responsible, at least at Seek anyway, they're responsible for end-to-end product, including monitoring, alerting, be on call, reliability, security, architecture, product, and then all of that stuff is kind of within their remit, if you will. So I guess the other thing is, hey, you've got all these standards. There's quite a lot of information in them, and by no means do we have like a lot of 100% coverage on all the things we'd like to cover, but we're building this repository as we go. As much as possible, every single requirement within those standards is built into common tooling or common libraries or common things that we're lucky enough to have a team at Seek called the PayVro team or dev practices or internal tools team, whatever you call it. It's a pretty well-known pattern. I think Auth0 just did a bit of a tweet thread about that, which I can link to as well, and their success with that kind of team. So basically putting as much effort and focusing a lot of our effort from a security perspective into that team so they can build most of these requirements in by default so that when they actually fill out this checklist thing to say, hey, are we using these for common tooling that's available to us at Seek, then all of a sudden 20 requirements just disappear from their Trello board. So they don't even see that stuff because they don't need to worry about it. So that's kind of the goal. That's definitely not where we're at, or we haven't had a lot of experience doing that, but that's kind of based on both Riot and also what Slack have done over the last 3 or 4 years, and it seems to work well for them. And we're just trying to improve it and make it work for Seek.
Yeah,
I'm kind of taking notes.
Yeah, it does sound very similar to, like you say, paved road, but the stuff that Netflix does as well, right? They've got their AppSec development team that basically goes out and develops these different pieces, and then they say, hey, if you use what we're giving you, it's going to be easier for you. And then number one, it'll be easier for you, but number two, it's going to take care of all the security stuff, and we won't have to worry as much, or we don't have to get involved as much. Whereas if you go completely custom, I'm going to have to know exactly what you're doing with secrets and with passwords and everything
exactly
else.
Yeah, it's exactly what Travis was talking about on your podcast previously around their I don't know what they call it, but their platform as a service kind of thing where you just everything's automated. So from the time at which you need to create a repo all the way through to like setting up a AWS account with all the infrastructure you need sorted, with all the proper configurations done for you. That's kind of, you just end up being a configuration file that a developer creates, and then through some magic and automation, it just creates this environment. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're trying to get to. We're definitely not there yet, but we're moving on to that journey because we've seen the successes that people like Netflix and that kind of thing are having with that model. Because you're taking that context away, you're putting automation in its place where possible, and that seems to work pretty well.
Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was, like you were talking about your intro to your tech intro. Is you said that's 2 days of security only training, or is that?
So we've changed our developer training a little bit over the years. So firstly, it started off as more of a 1-day course. There was like not really OWASP top 10, but it was more like, here's all the things that have been coming through our bug bounty program that are most common and kind of consumable, or things we've found through pen testing and that kind of thing. So that didn't cover everything, but it was just like a whirlwind tour of AppSec at Seek. We found it was pretty hard to schedule them in, and a lot of it wasn't relative to what they were doing day to day. So we're trying to move more towards just the tech induction, which is a 2-hour presentation we deliver during this kind of period where all these new devs are in a room, and we get 2 hours to join in on that conversation. So here's a presentation on the security team, how to reach out to us. Here's all the docs. Here's some references, a little bit about why we care about security, what things can go wrong. So kind of pointing out data breaches and why they're bad, and what data we have at Seek that's important to keep secure, like that kind of basic stuff. So we don't go too much into technical details at that point. And then we are running a few lengthier courses for people that are really interested in learning, like even how to pen test internally. One of our team members is working on that course at the moment. So that'll be like a 6-week course, 2 hours every Monday, every second Monday. And they actually get to learn like pen testing, for example, how to pen test their own apps and that kind of thing. So it's more of a security champions program a little bit, to get very smaller numbers of people educated, and then they can hopefully spread that knowledge. And doing things like internal CTFs, similar to kind of what I've seen Slack and Facebook and those kind of companies doing.
Okay. So you've dialed back then on that like 1-day kind of workshop training for developers from a security perspective to, hey, we've got like this 2-hour introduction about why security is important, and then you're trying to train up other team members as the security experts. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's really, training is difficult, right? Like, I mean, you think about what are you really trying to achieve?
That's why I'm asking, because we talk to all these different people, and I know, like, being a trainer, half the time we get on site with someone, and it's like, look, especially when I first started, like we'd have people in there. I'm like teaching the OWASP top 10, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm a COBOL mainframe developer," and I'm like, "I got nothing for you. Input validation, right?" Seriously, right? So that's why I'm asking, is because it's an interesting problem and no one solved it. So.
Or they send QA or project managers to the OWASP top 10 training.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's hard to get that. I think to me, the training, actually, first of all, I must admit, I've just been a bit lazy with the 1-day training course and haven't organized it yet for the next round of devs, but that's part of the reason. But the other part is we've been working on some kind of more snippets of things that they need to care about at the time. So this checklist thing will be like, hey, make sure you're taking care of XSS. Here's some link outs to like, OWASP resources or internal presentations that talk about that particular vulnerability. So really kind of getting that bite-sized, bits of information. And then if they really need more information on top of that, they can start reaching out to us or one of the people that are a bit more security savvy around the business as well. Because it's just like, it's a big suck of time doing those kind of OWASP top 10 or those kind of training courses. And they're really important from a cultural perspective. So building a culture of security and getting devs interested in security, I think that's probably the most beneficial part of any training, to be honest, internally. If you don't, that's where it comes back to outsourcing. It's really hard to do that when you have that kind of environment. But we're lucky enough to have mostly permanent / contractors. They're all permanent. So that seems to be the biggest benefit, because then you get people reaching out to you being like, hey, I accidentally stored a secret in GitHub. What do I do about it? In a public channel, within our security channel, so everyone can see it. And that kind of culture of like blameless and having the ability to empower the devs to actually be able to reach out to us like that in a public forum is pretty amazing. And that's kind of what we want to achieve longer term as well. More so than, I guess it's hard because the training, the more you push into public channels, the more people read about it in Slack threads and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like more just in time, but then the whole audience gets to see, and the more people interested will then read that thread and be like, oh, I didn't know about this NPM vulnerability, the one we mentioned earlier today, or oh, I didn't know about this. Let's read this thread. And then also things like every single high and medium rated bug bounty issue or pen test result or whatever result comes through, we make that as public as possible, and we do a massive write-up in like a Jira ticket that goes through how to reproduce it, what the risks are, what the vulnerability looks like, and then post that in a very well-monitored production channel. And you get a lot of people looking at and reading through that issue at the time. So it could be like server-side request forgery, metadata URL, all that kind of stuff, or those kind of issues and that's where you get the attention, and you can kind of attach like a mini slide deck or attach some resources to that Jira ticket. And then it becomes more applicable and more people are interested in it because it's something that's actually affected us. So I could go on about education. This. It's pretty.
No, I'm thinking about this one because when we get our HackerOne bugs in, our bounty submissions, we already have it tied into a channel that's just for like AppSec team members, triaging bounty issues. Then separately, we also have we have an automatic, we've chat ops up so that we immediately are able to, like, if we want to open an issue in the correct repository, we can like do that, right? We can run a command about the bug bounty that came in and create an automatically populated issue. Of course, we always have to go in and give context and all that stuff, but because now I'm thinking it would be kind of cool to be able to do that, to if something became I don't know about not during, but afterwards, after it's been, and also we have a bounty website. So I'm like, there's definitely a way for us to take note of kind of making that hey, this was something that, the reason I'm saying this is we actually just did training last week, walking through the top bug bounties or bug bounty submissions, the highest paid ones. So it's already we're trying to make that visible, but I hadn't thought about this, creating a some sort of public display in a Slack channel. Not like you said, you're not blaming anybody. You're just saying hey, this is interesting. And that was the approach we took, is this is actually interesting stuff. It might be worth the 10-minute or 5-minute read,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you think about how we are as developers, or even as a security consultant, right? One of my favorite things to do is get a hold of another consulting firm's report, right? And it's not because I want to necessarily bag on what they did or what they found, but it's more of, hey, am I doing the right thing? And I think this is what a lot of the developers doing in that situation is, you're looking at it and you're saying, is this something that I've thought about? Is it something that I need to be concerned about, this code, or there's something else that I'm doing in my daily life that maybe I can improve, right? It's the same reason that we're all on Twitter and we're all reading about different vulnerabilities that are out there. So why not internalize that? I like that idea. I don't know how to affect that change as a consultant, but you guys that are internal, it feels like, having some sort of a public channel or a public way to be like, hey, guess what? Every month we just send out a newsletter that says, these are the top 10 bug bounty items that we saw. Here's the write-ups on them, just to give people some sort of a feedback, or developers some sort of a window into what you're dealing with. Seems like an easy win. I mean, it's going to take some time, but it does seem like an easy win to at least integrate that security culture inside the development teams.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
I was going to say it does depend a little bit on the organization, because we're pretty lucky to have a pretty open organization and a culture, like a blameless culture. But if you go into like a larger organization or an organization with a lot higher risk tolerance, or a lower risk tolerance, I should say, they tend to not enjoy people making public some of this kind of information, even internally. I've spoken to a lot of financial institutions and things like that. So for those kind of companies, I was lucky enough just to kind of exactly just to kind of just do it. And we made our bug bounty alerts channel public to the whole company, so anyone can kind of join that channel if they want to see a stream of live vulnerabilities flowing through our systems. That no one's pushed back yet on that, so I guess we'll see. Maybe after this podcast I might get someone but that's helped tremendously, because then people can actually say, hey, there's actually things in our systems, and like they can see that things are a little bit on fire. They can see the triage process, they can see how we fix it, they can see how we write up the issues. And then you start to get these people, and not everyone's in that channel, right? Like there's only like 20 people, even though we've made it public. And those people that are in there are really keen, and they're kind of learning from it and getting more involved in security initiatives. Like going back to the process I was talking about before, one thing we're doing, like say we're using Docker, for example, and we've got this kind of sidecar model, and there's this tooling that will orchestrate the sidecars in a way that you can actually have, like, now it doesn't really matter what language the service is in, because we have quite a few different languages at Seek, and that presents its own challenges. But regardless of the language, now we can deploy this Docker container as a sidecar, which is in our case for logging or for authentication, and that's written in one language, that's done once, and now all teams can utilize that one sidecar, for example, in authentication, that basically adheres to the standard I was talking about before, like the RFC standard, and also contains all the different use cases and has been a bit more heavily vetted. And I know a lot of companies talk about getting alerted when a repo that's super sensitive changes, and then I think you've talked about a little bit at GitHub as well, and that seems to be pretty effective. But getting that kind of consolidated standard, or like tool or library or whatever that everyone is using, is quite a difficult task in itself, when you have a very diverse stack as well, like most companies tend to.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the bigger issues with like creating a paved path, when you're trying to, and this goes back to like the whole idea of outsourcing and the difficulty there. I mean, and the different, you mentioned, Julian, the different demographics of companies, and like there are companies that you're going to find a hodgepodge of different, like, and you mentioned it, Seth, like you might have stuff as far back as like COBOL mixed in with Java or Node.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely a difficult process. So like, Julian, how are you seeing that uptick then, right? Like you've got those people in the Slack channel, like how long have you been trying to kind of foster this openness? And then what have the results been so far? I mean, it sounds like some of those people are engaging in other security initiatives, but can you speak to kind of what it is?
So I'd say there's probably like I've definitely seen an improvement over the last few years, with all the kind of presentations we do. We do like kind of hack and seek sessions. We talked about like drone security the other day. One of the guys in our team did that, and we invite whoever wants to join. So there's kind of like these really ad hoc kind of more sessions designed to get more people interested in security. We make sure we do recognize when people contribute to a security project. A good example would probably be that sidecar I was talking about that wasn't developed actually by anyone in the team. We contributed to it, obviously, but that was actually done from another person, another dev at Seek, and they've contributed to several other projects to do with like service-to-service authentication, and they kind of run that now, and we don't even touch that from a security perspective almost. So there's a lot of these kind of projects that are happening, especially in the paved road team now, where we're starting to get a lot of that built in, because they get security, because they've kind of over the hurdle. It's no longer an extra thing they have to do. So I'd say that's probably like 10% to 20% of all developers at Seek are probably fitting in that kind of category. Maybe 5% are like really keen to kind of get involved and do a lot of, we call it magic time, time outside of their regular day to kind of get involved and learn. And then the rest of the community, there's probably like 30 or 40% that just get security and they're happy to kind of, within reason, obviously, fix vulnerabilities in their dependencies or fix things as we find visibility in their products. But there still is that kind of lagging percentage of people or teams that aren't quite on board, or they've got a lot of legacy to deal with, and it's really hard for them to put security work on top of that because they're trying to get all their tech debt sorted first, which they might have been neglecting for some time.
Yeah.
When you say magic time,
is
that included? Why I'm asking is I'm asking if that's like an included piece of the work day or work week, or if that's like outside of work hours, or what that is.
It's I'm not sure if that's a term Seek created or not, but essentially it's not really your 20% time that you have at Google and other companies where it's official time allocated to do whatever you want to work on. It's more like, hey, we're going to do a lunch hack, or we're going to do something during our lunchtime, or I finished all the work I was going to do today. I'm going to sneak in an extra few hours here and there on a Friday afternoon because I've done what I need to do. So it's kind of like on top of your day-to-day work, and it's something that you're passionate about. And we also have like hackathons, I guess, twice a year. So it's like 3 days where you can work on whatever you want. So that's our kind of compromise for your 20% time instead of doing that. So a lot of these projects start there and they get really, they get grown there, and then they continue on throughout the year in magic time. And there's a lot of projects like that where they're just not funded, or they need to be proven the value of, and you need to spend a bit of time either outside of work or, but yeah, it's not really considered. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't have magic time. It should be considered regular, normal work. And there should be a formal process to go through to get an idea through to actually becoming formal work. And we do have a similar process, but sometimes it's just easier to just get it done. And we have some passionate people about certain topics, and they'll just do it because they love it.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, because that's something we've had discussed on the podcast, was having security as part of, like, if we want developers to spend time on it, like we need to have that be a part of like their what am I trying to say? Reviews, like they're part of their like assessment as an employee. Like if, for instance, if somebody spends, like we'll say 20 hours in a quarter on like building something like that, and it wasn't maybe formal work, and it's during the magic time, does that end up being financially, a positive for them? I mean, it's one of those things where I'm not sure how each company does it. Like, I don't know if they get rewarded for that, like, or if it's just, that's, like you said, the reward is that people are really psyched to do that, and so they just do it. Like, it's the culture.
It really depends on, I think, partly, at least at Seek, like the manager, how much they see that work providing value to the rest of the org or their team. Financially, I think it's just yet another thing that they can put into their like professional skills development and things that they've, because we have like passion towards our customers and internal people as well. So there's a lot that you could put in from that perspective. So I think it wouldn't be hard to justify it, but I don't think there's a formal kind of process. We do have, I'm not sure if you have something similar at GitHub. Or, I know like Medium released this growth framework for engineers, which basically goes through all the different little elements that they care about from their engine. Like, so it's very similar to that conversation of like quantifying how good a developer is or an engineer is, and all the different aspects to their role that the business cares about, all the way from technical to cultural to stakeholder management to like people growth, like are they mentoring people, all that kind of stuff. And it goes into very granular attributes to say, has this engineer shown this thing? And then here's a few examples of what that looks like. Very simple terms, and it's a bit broad, but it gives you an indication. Then you get a score out of it, basically, and then you can start rating people. And what we're trying to introduce something similar at Seek, and I was lucky enough to get involved in that project because they reached out to me. Probably another benefit of building solid relationships internally, which is something I've discovered. You get involved in a lot more of these conversations up front. but we added a security element to that. So now there's all this kind of stuff where it's like, if you're a level 5, for example, which is the highest level engineer, you could demonstrate that you're influencing security across the organization instead of just within your team. So if you're contributing to, and then some of the examples are like developing a Seek auth sidecar, right? Or developing something that scans secrets in GitHub, or whatever it is that they want to contribute to that is usable by the whole, all of the product teams. So it's actually formally documented in that process, but that's yet to be kind of pushed out a little bit within Seek yet. So it's still in draft.
Yeah, and to be clear, like, I'm not certain that going back to the like developer incentive, that like a financial gains, even, because I think, Seth, was it you and I read some of the same books? That's why I'm asking you. Was it Drive? I think it was maybe Drive.
Yeah. First Drive.
Where they talked about
intrinsic,
it's not like
motivation.
Intrinsic motivation. No, go ahead. Like, it was like intrinsic motivation is often like what was it, like the financial,
yeah,
so it's your base level financial needs are met or something like that.
Yeah, that once you hit a certain threshold in your salary and in kind of your daily life, and it covers all of your needs and your wants, at that point throwing more money at engineers and at people it backfires, right? You want to have them intrinsically motivated to go out and do like what Julian is saying, right? Hey, you've got magic time. I'm interested about this. I'm going to go do this because it's good for me and it's good for the company. And if the company pays for it and actually goes out and rewards it, at that point, it's just another item on their to-do list, right? And you lose that intrinsic motivation to go and discover new things. It's a kind of a strange balance that they found, right? That's all that it is it's just this kind of strange, and it's about being like happy in your job. And so there's all sorts of other things that go into it.
Yeah, there is a line there, right? Because sometimes you hear, oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Julian.
No, that's right. I definitely recommend that book. So you keep going. I've got a few points on that too.
No, yeah, I was just going to say there's that line where it's like between where, like you said, there's that fostering the intrinsic motivation and providing the time for it, and then abusing it. And to be clear, this is I'm just like kind of just thinking out loud here. I'm just like, there's certainly that there certainly is that line between having like passionate folks and then how you hear people say passionate and as in like work 80 hours and just because you're like passionate about my company. But yeah, like fostering so I guess it comes down to culture. I mean, I think it always comes down to culture. And in fact, I think during Seth, one of our first few episodes, we talked about this where we're like, if you like where you decide to work and what you go for is like it's gonna determine a lot about your trajectory, and you should really be careful. And if you're thinking like, I don't know, this isn't for me, probably just back out and find somewhere where the culture seems right. Oh, okay. I see you actually posted that link.
Yeah.
Drive. Cool. Sorry, Julian, what was the point you said you had a couple points on that note?
I was just going to say, I'm actually almost finished reading that book right now. Listening to it, I should say, on Audible. So definitely recommend it. It was really enlightening to see some of the research that they went into to actually prove the different types of motivation, like the carrot, stick, and then the intrinsic motivation as a separate third one, which no one knew about until they did some of that research a long time ago. It just all made sense, but it was just obvious. And a lot of people in security that I talk to tend to focus on the carrot or the stick, mostly the carrot, and then they think they're doing a good thing by focusing on, I don't know if that's a terminology you guys are aware. Is that a common
carrot stick?
Cool.
No, it's not like a special Aussie one.
I have to check because like some of the stuff we come up with is just stupid. So you have to just
Vegemite, the kangaroo. I don't know.
Yeah. There's all these terms.
Didn't you send us? What didn't you? Or I don't know if it was you who somebody sent a list of like the terms, and it was hilarious. I was like, oh, that's actually good to know. It's like really helpful to know the list of terms. They are like, there's a bunch of them, and I would have not guessed any of them.
Yeah, there's definitely a few Simpsons episodes as well, and things like that. Plenty of that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
But yeah, that was just really interesting to hear that. And I think the important thing that stood out to me is that carrots and sticks don't work longer term. So if you really want to succeed with security and pushing security into a company, you really have to use intrinsic motivation, because that's like really the only long-term thing. Because as soon as you start turning off the tap to like giving people more money or giving them rewards, they'll just stop doing it. And likewise with the carrot, the stick, if you keep penalizing people and forcing people to do things, they'll just stop doing it as soon as they don't have to. So that intrinsic motivation is something that I'm pretty passionate about. But it comes back to like having that culture, right? And if you don't have the ability to empower and build that culture and those relationships, I mean, I might be proved wrong, but I feel like that's like a disaster waiting to happen if you're trying to do intrinsic motivation. And a lot of companies have that outsourcing problem, and I just can't see that happening. If you're a consultant working in a different country for $9 an hour, for example, coming back to Boeing, I don't think you're going to be intrinsically motivated to do the right thing for that company, you know?
No, I've thought about this when we were talking about it. Actually, it's funny you bring it up because, like Seek, GitHub, like a lot of the companies we've had on here, Segment, Netflix, like those developers are the things I see anyways, when we talk about like bug bounty submissions. They like the majority, and again, talking about libraries that make things secure, we have that, right? So like a lot of the things that are we kind of have a lot of the base level stuff covered. So when we do get bug bounty submissions in, often it's something that is like fairly complicated and interesting. And that's going back to like the training that we gave where we walked through some of those bug bounty submissions. Like they sometimes are, I don't know where I'm going with this, but they are sometimes like super interesting. But going back to like the developer equality, on the flip side of that, I've been a part of, so like Seth and I worked at Fishnet. So I've done consulting for, and I'm not saying it was at Fishnet, I'm just saying I've done consulting, and some of those companies, they do outsource. Like we've seen shitty mobile apps from companies that were outsourced overseas to do mobile apps. We've seen same thing for web apps, and it's not just outsourced. Sometimes it's a mix, and sometimes it is a company whose culture is it's clear, like like it was made clear to the senior engineers at Boeing that they're not super valued, and there's not a lot of time put in for like giving them for like, or funds for like go get some training or like whatever like perks that should be there. They're just not there. So like, yeah, my point being is there's like those I don't know how to fix it for the companies that aren't like Seek and aren't like GitHub and don't hire like the top-notch developers that we all have. I don't know how to fix that. For how do you foster, how do you cultivate that intrinsic motivation inside of a company like that?
No idea.
Seth, you gonna solve this? Seth, you gonna crack this egg?
If I could, I'm sure it would be worth quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
It's just like,
because we always hear training, right? We always hear training, like for those companies specifically. And what type of training does it end up being?
Oh, it's compliance training. It's checklist training, right? It's not.
It's SCORM compliant.
Yeah, it's SCORM compliant training.
Actually, I heard a really good story about this. So there was an outsourced company working for a financial institution. I won't give out too many details, but basically they tried to train the developers, right, doing like OWASP Top 10 or whatever it was, and they pushed out this training module, and they worked out that 30 to 50 of these developers, and they're in a different country. What they did was, instead of getting everyone to fill it out, they actually got one really good person over there to fill it out, and then everyone else copied the results. And the submission times were like bang on, like the same time, basically, or around the same time, and the exact same results. So even when you try and push out that kind of compliance training in this environment, anyway, I just think it's just turtle all the way down,
Yeah, never underestimate, people that are under pressure to deliver things. and the ingenuity that they will have to actually get around something that they see as invaluable, or like not as invaluable as, as worthless, right? I mean, Ken and I had this discussion quite a bit. At one point, we built like a training platform, and that was one of the things that we were worried about. Is like, hey, we're having developers fix code. Why wouldn't they just go in and do like a Git, a Git branch, and actually see what the other branches that were already fixed, and just copy and paste that right in? Like, we had to jump through so many hoops to prevent people from cheating, right? Because people are like, people would do it, right?
But we would tell people, because they'd be like, well, what's your foolproof plan for that? We're like, we don't have one. Like, there's not a foolproof way. People will, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. The foolproof plan doesn't exist. What you can do is probably give, like, again, like good training, right? It's not stuff that I guess that people would want to take. But if you don't give that magic, going back to the 20% time or the magic time or whatever it is, if you're under, like Seth mentioned, if you're under a lot of pressure and there's deadlines to hit and there's, like no time for that always, and you're always under the gun, I mean, it's just, ask Boeing. It's,
Well, I don't know.
Show,
I mean,
so
the intrinsic motivation is interesting. Like, I find personally, like, since I read that book, it's easier to actually identify that, like, in me personally, right? As a consultant, there may be like these super cool projects that are coming in, but like, once you've tested, 100 web apps, it's really hard to get excited about testing the 101st one, right? Even though the process, what's going to happen, it's all there. But that intrinsic motivation, even though that's what's paying my bills, it's very difficult to get excited about it. It just is, right? It feels like a slog. Even if it's an app I haven't seen before, even if it's a technology I haven't, like, I have to find other ways to kind of trick myself to be like, hey, this is interesting, and there is something new here that, I can pull from it that maybe I haven't in the past, right? But like, without being able, like, I have a hard time identifying that for myself, and so I don't know how to push it out to other people, right? Outside of giving them some time and saying, hey, go for it and figure out what's interesting to you. Like, there's no magic formula outside of magic time, apparently. Yeah.
Maybe we should get one of those corporate productivity consultants on, and they can maybe share secrets for that. So.
I'm gonna make Julian a shirt that just says it's magic time, right?
It's magic time.
It's magic time. You know what? When we show up in Australia, expect you're gonna have a magic time Julian shirt.
You've heard it on live, so you got to follow through now, Ken.
Yeah, exactly.
It's happening. You heard it here first.
Man, that sounds like a great T-shirt, like for the next Absolute AppSec T-shirt.
I know, it's magic time. That's awesome.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, Julian, we've been going for over an hour at this point. We didn't even get into your background, man.
No, we didn't. That's okay. I'm okay with that.
Man,
how much time we got? I mean, we can talk about AppSec Day a little bit, or we can talk about something else to talk about, like around gates and that kind of thing. So it's up to you. Like, what do you want to focus on?
Yeah, let's talk about AppSec Day.
All right. Well, obviously, you both will be there, which is awesome. Second time this year.
Yay!
We just announced the talks, and I'm actually really excited about the lineup this year. It's blown my mind how many people have submitted and agreed to talk. It involved a lot of wrangling from lots of different people on the review board and myself to reach out to all these awesome people. But I'm like really stoked. We got like a whole day, and there's 4 streams of talks. Like, and then 8 training courses this year, which is crazy.
Nice.
So it's all kind of happening, but it'd be good to kind of see it all eventuate. I'm really excited about it actually this year, but it is a fair bit of work at the moment. So
no, we loved
behind.
No, we loved it last year, and like I don't know if I told you, but after. Why am I blanking on his name? Because it's after 11 o'clock at night. I'm old. This is late. yeah, was it Max? I want to say Max from Slack.
Yep.
Which is, why am I forgetting? That's the name of my son. So I don't know why. Anyways, yeah. So I reached out to him afterwards to get some tips and pointers based off his like how to run a CTF, or his experiences running a CTF, both like by outsourcing to another company and also like running it themselves. So yeah, it was awesome from that perspective. Like yeah, it's very useful, practical. I think that's something like we should definitely note, is that it's a very, especially for software developers and like internal AppSec folks, it's very focused on like prevention solutions, interesting things around that.
Yeah, definitely not targeted too much towards the offensive side. We do have 3 or 4 topics around offensive techniques, and then also some around the blue teaming kind of IR perspective, which I think is important for devs as well to really understand, given that at least in a lot of organizations, they're in charge of their whole stack and monitoring and that kind of thing. But we try and focus a lot on just what would a developer want to know, but also then, you know, I'm a bit biased. I'm a security professional. I want some awesome talks as well. So we try and cater for both. It's pretty hard sometimes. But one thing we don't really do a lot of is do the 101 kind of talks, because I feel like we can probably just outsource that to the internet a little bit.
Yeah. No, the great thing that like we found last year was that I mean, just the sheer number of developers that you got at AppSec Day, like in the States, honestly, we do not see that, right? Like at the security conferences, we'll see some, but like the high percentages, like, did you ever get numbers on how many of your attendees are developers versus security professionals?
A ballpark, because we actually, during the keynote, or just before the keynote, we got everyone to put their hands up if they don't work in security, basically. And I think it was around 70% didn't work in security.
That's crazy. That's like, that's awesome.
So it's great, because that's one of our goals. It's one of my personal goals. Preaching to the choir, like security professionals, doesn't really help a lot. We really need to like solve the problem where it is, which is the people creating the software in the first place. And that's kind of one of my big motivations to running AppSec Day, and also the OWASP Melbourne meetup, is really just to get, a lot of conferences do tend to focus a lot on security professionals, which is important, and we definitely need those conferences as well. But I'm trying to get a bit of mix of both, and heavy towards the developer. And there's quite a few things we did to get that metric.
Yeah. So how did you do that? Like that was going to be my next question. What was it that you did?
So yeah, a few things. The first thing is we kept the ticket price to 100 to 150 bucks Australian, which is like nothing for when you look at the talks we have coming up for this event. Like it's crazy, really low price, to be honest, compared to a lot of the AppSec global events that are in the 1,000 mark for a ticket. And I'm not sure about other conferences, but they tend to be a bit higher in the cost range, and a lot of people can't make it because of that. And then also we definitely make sure we do it during a weekday, because we started at AppSec Day, the first year was on a weekend, and we worked out that a lot of engineers just couldn't take the time off. One, because they had family commitments and things like that, but also because it's not their day job. So forcing them to come on a weekend was a little bit harsh. So we changed it to like a weekday, obviously. So that was another thing. And then the other thing we do is reach out to people on Twitter that are in the development community, reached out to meetup groups around Australia that are development focused, and encouraging them to turn up, and doing a lot of outreach, I guess, on social media, relating that. A lot of the marketing and a lot of the advertisement is focused around, this is a developer conference, even though it's also designed for security professionals. We try and say developer first, and then security. So the language, I guess, of the conference is very much around that. And then we also spend some of our budget on marketing, like ad campaigns and things, specifically targeting those audiences, because a lot of the devs, it's hard to reach them, because a lot of our networks as a team and around the security industry are security people, not developers. So it's hard to kind of get that reach without kind of spending a bit of money sometimes, and doing a lot of outreach in different places. So it's pretty difficult.
Which social media platform do you have better luck with when it comes to reaching out to software developers? I have my guess, but I'm curious.
To be honest, I think it's Twitter is probably our main one. LinkedIn doesn't really work as well because a lot of the people that my network connects with aren't developers. I got quite a few at Seek, obviously, and I've got a background in dev, so I got some knowledge there, and I guess I have some connections around the industry that can help promote it a little bit. But yeah, it's really difficult, and a lot of the meetups is probably the best place, but a lot of times the meetup groups don't like advertising for these kind of things because it gets a bit spammy for them. As a meetup owner, I know that already. That's the case. So then you have to tend to go to the meetups, and that's a lot of effort. So there's a lot, and go to dev. So I presented a lot of developer conferences. I tend to not present at security conferences that much anymore. And for that reason, to kind of get that knowledge out to them, to where they are, and then advertise it during the talk and get them interested. So I've done that a few times this year and last year as well.
Are you coming back stateside, by the way? Speaking of, because I remember last year you came to AppSec USA in California, and I think you said you tried to make it back to the States. Was it every year or was it once in a while?
Yeah, I try to. I think there's a lot to learn from those kind of conferences, especially in Australia. We're a little bit behind sometimes. So it's really good to hear what the latest and greatest tech companies are doing, and then you can kind of so I'll be most likely, 90+% likely going to AppSec USA again this year. Oh, sorry, Global AppSec DC.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And maybe DevSecCon in Seattle. So that's still pending, but yeah, that'll be around September. So I'm keen to. You guys are going to one? Are you going to Global? Yeah, you'll be there because you're doing the training. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, I live here, so let me know if you're coming to DC.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, I'll definitely be at DC. That's my priority. So yeah.
Awesome.
Sweet.
That's great. We'll definitely link up.
Cool. That's about it. Yeah, I think.
No, yeah, we're looking forward. Okay. Yeah, we're looking forward to AppSec Day again. I was pretty excited to throw the hat in the ring again and make the trip down. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have a decent crowd this time as well. So I think I'm gonna have to work. I hope everyone stays for the after party. Let's put it that way. We've got a fair bit of budget sitting on the minimum spend of the drink. So if no one turns up, we're just gonna open bar it. I think I've already promised a few of the speakers some whiskey, so to tempt them into coming to Melbourne. So yeah, we'll have to have a bit of a party afterwards, which should be good because the actual event is alcohol free. So
yes.
Mainly cost related, but also just I prefer it that way as well. Not that I'm anyway.
No. That's we've had guests on, and that's been a big thing. As of recently, is making people feel a little bit more comfortable, and a little bit safer, and a little less. It's because some people don't even drink for whatever reasons, religious or otherwise. So yeah, that's definitely been a thing. So I totally understand.
Yeah. And also selfishly, as a conference organizer, it's kind of like, I don't need any more fuel to the fire to create more potential incidents during the day. So,
very good call.
Yeah, cool.
I am looking forward to those croissants too.
Oh yeah,
croissants were amazing.
I mean, one thing Melbourne's known for is food. That's for sure. There's a large variety of food, so it's a good city.
Oh my gosh. The best Argentinian steakhouse I've ever been to was there. So yeah, great city. I mean, honestly, it was we not to talk shit about Sydney, but we went to Sydney after Melbourne, and I was like, I don't want to go back to my whole family. They were like, let's go back to Melbourne. That was better. So I'm not even kidding. Like they were like, we did the picture with the Opera House, and then we're like, we can get out, we can leave. So.
You might lose some Sydney side subscribers after that comment. But
totally.
there's always a bit of a rivalry between the two cities. It's pretty funny from that perspective, like livability and weather differences and how close to the beach they are versus like all this kind of stuff. I'm biased, so.
Yeah, no, it was just Melbourne was just an easier to get around city. It was beautiful. It was good food. So also, I don't care if we lose people. So oh well. Anyways, cool.
Sweet.
Hey, wow, like I feel like we could still go for another hour. Obviously, like we won't. But yeah, like this was a great conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Having you on.
And
yeah,
you know,
likewise.
Maybe when we get down there, like we'll have to see if we can, you know, do something live or, you know, maybe do a mini episode or something like that from the conference. I think it'd be fun. We've talked about it before.
I was actually thinking I was going to email you guys, but may as well do it live on the site. We could even, pressure. Yeah, we could even do a live stream of the panel at the end of the day if we're keen. So let's chat about that.
That would be amazing. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it'd fit right in. So yeah, let's talk about it. That'd be good.
Yeah, we keep talking about doing it, and like the most I think Locomoco Sec from 2018, April 28. I think it was April 2018 for Locomoco Sec. That was the only one we actually ever got to. I think we didn't do any other ones from conferences, right?
No, most of it's been me sitting in a hotel room somewhere. That's been super fun too.
Yes, yeah, yes.
Yeah. That was you and Justin sitting at the beach, not listening to me. Yeah, that was fun.
And you know what's funny is, you didn't go again.
I know.
You didn't go again. It's a Locomoco Sec. So maybe 2020 is the year you get it together, Seth.
Is there a conference in Hawaii? Yeah.
I was going to say, maybe I should just turn up to Locomoco. It's like halfway to the US for us anyway. So I think
it's easier, right? What's that, a 7 or
probably like
7 hour flight?
Probably triple the amount of cost, but that's okay. Just half the flight time, so it's all good. Sounds worth it.
Sweet. Well, good. Well, Julian, thanks again for joining. It's been great to see you again and catching up. We're looking forward to seeing you in DC and in Melbourne later this year. Remind us again how people can get in touch with you if they've got questions about AppSec Day or anything.
Probably Twitter is probably the best option. I'm pretty Googleable. If you just type my name in, it should come up with Twitter and a few other links. So my OppSec is pretty bad from that perspective.
I'm putting in your a link to your Twitter page now so that people can reach out. Cool, that's done.
Yeah, super honored to get invited onto the show. So I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, no problem.
No.
Yeah, it's been great. So yeah, I'm not sure, Ken, as far as the upcoming episodes, I think we've got some scheduling to do.
Yeah, I've got specifically some people I need to respond to, and I apologize. I've been traveling a lot. So
we do have some interesting stuff, like Jerry Gamblin, his vulnerablecontainers.org, should be interesting. He wants to come talk about that, but there's 3 or 4 others that I know will be on in the next couple of months, like over the summer. So watch the Twitter account or join the Slack channel. Either way, you can always find me and Ken. DMs are open on Twitter, or you can join Slack to talk to us. But I appreciate everybody listening today. Ken, anything else?
There was a CFP that was closing soon, and I wanted to mention, I can't remember who it's for. Well, if I remember, I'll put in the details or the description of this video.
Okay, cool. All right.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening. And Julian, don't jump off just yet. All right. Have a good night.